It's a wonderful world. The world of design is a wonderful world. I mean, it is the sculpture of the everyday object, be it your toothbrush or taking the lid off your toothpaste. I mean, a multitude of little tiny parts of our lives.
This is the story of how one man changed the way we cook, travel, and capture our lives. His products are part of our everyday lives and are used by millions of people.
The range of what he's done is quite extraordinary.
Beautifully made, exceptionally well engineered, and a joy to use.
It's bright, it's striking, it's fast, it says, "Look at me."
This changed everything.
This is the man who made our lives modern.
Sir Kenneth Grange is one of the most prolific and influential designers of all time. He was born in London in 1929, and his interest in art and design began at an early age.
The beginning of my art education started with my putting my arm up in assembly one morning when the headmaster said that there were possibilities of applying for a scholarship to go to art college. So I started art school in Willesden at age 14. In the art school, there were just two streams. One was called fine art and one was called commercial art. And since I clearly was going to have to make a living at it, or hopefully, it was going to be commercial art. But most of my education started with the people who employed me. I really believe that now.
The 1950s was a period of great innovation for Britain. As the country began to emerge from post-war austerity, the Festival of Britain showcased the best in art, science, industry, and design. One of Grange's first commissions was an exhibition designer for the highly influential festival. But it was a new partnership that would transform his career.
A Kenwood chef came into being in the late 1940s out of a collaboration between Kenwood and his business partner at the time, Roger Lawrence. It was launched at the Ideal Home show in 1950. In the typical kitchen of the time, you wouldn't have had many appliances. You may or may not have had an electric fridge. You might have still had an old larder. So very few actual sort of wired up appliances. What the chef did in terms of revolutionising home cooking was providing all the sorts of gadgets you might keep in your kitchen drawers, and it brings them all together in one machine that's going to do everything. When they were thinking about redesigning the chef after it had been in existence for about 10 years, Kenwood thought maybe it was time for a bit of a revamp, a whole new aesthetic, a whole new look to the chef.
Kenneth Wood, who I came to know very well, had sort of stumbled upon the idea of employing a designer. And I probably was the cheapest, and I almost certainly offered to do it the quickest. I said I'd do it in 3 days. And I started making a complete model of this thing, out of wood and shaping it and filing it and so on. But I ran out of time. It was quite obvious that I wasn't going to finish it in time. Out of sheer necessity, there wasn't any artifice on my part at all, but I realised that I could make half a model quicker than I could make a whole model. So I cut it down the middle. I cut it straight down the middle and took a mirror. And so that when you put the half up against the mirror, momentarily you would say you saw the whole thing. And of course I went to present this on the morning in question, terrified. Am I absolutely raw and never ever had a real client before. But Kenneth Wood, to his everlasting credit, a great salesman, and he probably thought it was a great trick.
Kenneth Grange brought a very simple, in a way of working and a simple aesthetic to the chef. He pared down what was needed on the machine to simplify the look, to make it easy for a user to use. He streamlined the whole machine. There are sort of colour-blocked new materials introduced to show where the different added accessories might be added onto the machine. His sort of genius is sort of taking maybe a light touch approach where he knows what the machine is meant to do and he redesigns the look around that. So he has tweaked the engineering inside the chef, but the key difference is really the look. There's a far more modern aesthetic. You can mince, grind, there's coffee mills, ice cream makers, choppers, mincers, dicers, a liquidizer for the top. I'm struggling to think of something you couldn't do with a Kenwood chef.
Talking about the values of the Kenwood mixer, I think it's a great deal to do with its straightforwardness. It's an uncomplicated thing to use, and it seems never ever to fail you. It's very robust, and so they got to be handed on even. And mothers would very happily buy one for their daughter on their wedding day, knowing that they were also going to have it for life.
So he designed this machine just to last and last and last, and that's exactly what it does. It's like the Terminator, it just goes on and doesn't break down. You'd always know who the favourite child was because they would be the one to inherit that Kenwood chef. Oh, it's so lovely. I think I stroke this chef more than I stroke my cats.
With the success of the Kenwood mixer, it wasn't long before Kenneth Grange caught the attention of one of the biggest brands of the era.
Kodak emerged in the late 19th century and it completely transformed photography at the time. In 1900, they produced the Kodak Brownie. The Brownie was mind-blowingly successful. There was loads of different models. And over the years, it just carried on going. But over the decades, it started to look a little bit old hat. It looked very old-fashioned by the 1930s and then the 1940s and then the 1950s. So at the beginning of the 1960s, Kodak went to Kenneth Grange with a problem. And that problem was, we are losing ground here in the photography market. We are the founders of the amateur photography market. We are Kodak. But we're not cool anymore. We're very old-fashioned. It's the kind of camera that people's grandparents used. So they said, could you help?
I was doing the display inside a pavilion in the big World Fair in Brussels for Kodak. And I said to nobody in particular what a marvellous job this would be. I was arranging products in display if the products weren't so damned ugly. And the man who'd been unpacking the boxes looked up and said, well, that's a bit of a thing. What would Kodak have to pay if they wanted to change the shape of it? And I had no idea, but I said, I don't know, a couple of £100, something like that, I suppose, and carried on unwrapping and so on. I came back to London, and the following morning, the telephone rang. A man said, my name's Pitt, Dr. Pitt. I'm head of developments at Kodak, and I understand you're going to design a camera for us. That's exactly the conversation.
They had two ideas. One was to reinvent the Brownie, to create a new Brownie that would be modern but would carry on the tradition, the Brownie name and the kind of positive associations that people had with this brand, and to create a new camera entirely. So what Grange did was he came in and he looked at the Brownie and he thought about the user experience for the first time in decades. He realized that lots of the things that the Brownie did were not very good. The pointy corners were not that helpful. They weren't very ergonomic. So he decided to rebuild it as a plastic injection molded camera. And this changed everything.
There we are. It's called the Vector. By the time this one came along, I'd been doing quite a lot of work for Kodak. And the thing I spotted was that most of the pictures that were coming off were of people, families, kids, mums and dads and so on. And the interesting thing was that although the format was what we call landscape, so that sort of shape, the image was usually of people. And so you got this sort of format, and in the middle was a person. I then realised that had they taken the camera and turned it round, the person being photographed would occupy more of the film, and therefore, when enlarged, you get a better quality reproduction because it started life as a big image on the film. And the solution to that was to stop them winding the film horizontally in a camera, as it were, that shape, and to wind it vertically. So in this case, the spool is down here, there's another spool up here, and the film works vertically. So the shape of the picture is portrait, but then you've got to hold it. Hence these funny shapings here. These are entirely so that you could hold the camera and therefore take the picture, comme ça. And so one thing led to another, and I designed a succession of cameras, including the Kodak Instamatic, the most successful camera they ever made.
The Instamatic was outrageously successful. It was so successful because of its cheapness, because of its ease of use, because it looked quite cool. It was quite sharp, it had really nice graphics on the front. It looked modern, and a camera that is completely ergonomically designed to be comfortable and pleasant to use. You take your Instamatic, you snap your film cartridge in the back, and away you go. And this led to more people taking up photography than ever before. And that led us through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s to where we are now, which is this expectation that anybody can take a photograph. And the expectation that amateur cameras will do this comes from the Brownie Vector and the Kodak Instamatic. And that is because of the work that Kenneth Grange did.
With successes in kitchenware and photography, Grange's next big project would be perhaps his most enduring and best loved. With passenger numbers falling in the late 1960s, British Rail began developing the advanced passenger train, heralded as the future of high-speed rail. But with progress on the project stalled, a simpler, faster solution was needed.
The 125 is a pivotal point in the modern railway story. It's where the railway moves out of the period of steam and looks to the future.
British Rail had originally approached Grange to add the livery and colour to an already designed power car, but he decided to take it one step further.
We had quite a lot of time in hand, and I thought it was quite interesting to have a go at designing the exterior, reshaping it, because it was a rather clumsy shape, the one that they were going to use. I rented space at the wind tunnel at the Imperial College, and with smoke trails, we modified my shaping to be more and more effective in an aerodynamic pattern.
He took the plan to British Railways Board. He took the results of the wind tunnel tests, and BR liked what they saw, and they said, yeah, let's do that. It doesn't just look good in terms of the colours, but it delivers in terms of aerodynamism and efficiency and just changing the look of Britain's railways, which is what we want.
When the train first hit the community, it was the only modern thing in sight. There was nothing else that approached it as evidence of the future. That, I think, was a great piece of good fortune, to be part of that optimism that it started to sow among the workforce.
What Sir Kenneth had done was like something they'd never seen before. A shape that had never been seen before, a style that had never been seen before. It's bright, it's striking, it's fast, it says, look at me. And it says, this is the future. Forget what's gone, this is what's to come. It's a uniform piece of design on the move through the landscape, and it looks fantastic. And what started off as a project to look at the livery, the colour, translated into something that changed the look of Britain's railways forever. It still looks fresh, it still looks dynamic. It wasn't just about style, it was about efficiency and speed and the ability to do the job as well as look good. And the 125 combines that and sets the standard for the next 40 years. And is entirely down to the events of the early 1970s and the involvements of Kenneth Grange.
For over 6 decades, Sir Kenneth Grange's iconic designs have helped shape the modern world. His innovative products have made an incredible contribution in changing and enhancing our day-to-day lives.
There is something so distinctive about a Kenneth Grange product. They're always incredibly elegant, but it's also about function. He always aimed to make something the best it could possibly be, to solve a problem, to be the best solution ever to that problem. But this very unassuming man will leave a huge legacy in these fantastic designs.
I think I've been very fortunate. I've managed to do an awful lot of stuff. And stuff that I've done, be it a camera or a shaver or whatever, most of the things I've designed go on for a very long time. So maybe there is some theme, some sort of handwriting, some vernacular that is Granger's vernacular. It's a nice thought. I've never been so flattered in my life, really.
So, Sir Kenneth, lovely to see you this morning. And it's my very great pleasure on behalf of the Science Museum Group to present you with this certificate of your fellowship of the Science Museum Group. We're absolutely thrilled that you've agreed to be a fellow, celebrated quite rightly for your excellence in industrial design.
Well,
so with many congratulations and thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Mary. That's an absolute treat as far as I'm concerned, and an honour that I don't in many ways feel I deserve, but I'll accept it, and I'm really, really thrilled to be here.